This is the account of the battles which took place during the Great War, the battles between the Ultaran and Nettza armies. These were the kings of Ultira who came after Rakaza, King Salaziel, King Marhevian, King Thelius, King Thaxa, King Gethron, King Palionis, and King Celestine. And it came to pass, one night, as Celestine fell into a deep slumber, that he was given a vision from Amnia. Toniel appeared before Celestine in his dream and said, "Child of man, heed my words, for they are just and true. From your line will come forth the dawn star, which will shine forth and prevail against the darkness, and the light will eclipse its shadows. The star is a child, and he will be of your blood. The child who will bring balance to the world will come from the family of Frasier. Write this down as the sun rises in the morning, for this prophecy is true." Then, when Celestine awoke the next morning, he wrote down the things which he heard in his dream. Celestine gave himself the surname Frasier, so that his offspring would begin the Frasier family. These were the kings of Ultira who came after Celestine: King Azinu, King Eltaset, King Brovers, King Antion, King Hesh, King Jephel, King Venustar, King Unicarin, King Arcelox, King Elison, King Marshuzafek, King Talais, and King Airfane. King Airfane begot Kelin, who took Helena as his wife. And Helena bore Holly Frasier. Now Holly fell in love with a man named Alfortzia Ankajar, and they married. So Alfortzia became the next king of Ultira. Alfortzia kept his surname, for he took pride in his family name, for his father and mother, Sesthanes and Mylvana, were loyal servants of the royal family in the palace. The Great War, caused by the stirring of tensions between peoples because of infernos, which was let loose by Rakias the Precursor, had been going on for 10 years. King Ankajar held the throne at this time, and he began to prepare for the coming battles that he knew would take place. The word went out through all Ultira that the king was building an army. Soldiers from the palace patrolled the streets and plazas, and they posted sealed papers on the walls of inns and taverns. The people would read the letters, and, even seeing the seal of the king, would reject the order. So King Ankajar called his soldiers to the throne room and said to them, "We haven't a need for meaningless letters, take them by force. We need an army. Or, do the people not understand that if we were attacked, our city would crumble? Go, and arrest the men of the city, weak and strong, young and old, and bring them to my quarters." The soldiers did as they were told. The soldiers went out into the city, taking their chariots with them. They took every man whom they judged to be fit for battle, and they bound them with chains. Then, by evening that day, many soldiers returned to the quarters of the palace courtyard to present their men to the king. King Ankajar went down the rows of potential soldiers and found them all to be able. Then King Ankajar said, "I have deemed all you men to be able for battle. From this night onward, you will be trained under General Nair, in the military outposts that lie on the edges of the wall of the city. Do not get comfortable in your training, for if there arises the need for troops, or if there be an ambush, you must all fight." The men obeyed the king, and none of them mumbled under their breath or complained. King Ankajar sent them off to the training outposts that night, and the men worked tirelessly, having no rest. As the sun rose that morning, Ankajar sent his personal guards to the outposts. The guards recorded what they saw, that the men were working diligently and were growing stronger, and they returned to the palace. The guards reported to Ankajar with their reports, and he was pleased with them. Because of this, Ankajar would send good food to the men in the outposts. This motivated the men to work harder, and they grew stronger. As the seasons passed and winter ended, the troops were prepared for battle. When King Ankajar made time for himself, he went down to visit the outposts. And when he looked and saw that his troops were ready for battle, he was proud, and said unto the people, "I am proud that you have all trained this persistently. Your diligence will not go unrewarded. For when the time comes, we shall enter the great war, and you will die for this kingdom, and your names will be renowned throughout the land, and pass down the ages. Therefore, I make you the new official army of Ultira." So the Ultaran army was formed, and more men joined its ranks throughout the next 2 years. Now the Ultaran army was large, and Ultira was the greatest military power in all the lands. But while the kingdom of Ultira grew, there was yet another kingdom growing as well, a kingdom from another world. This kingdom was the capital of the Rift Plain Enox, the kingdom of Nettza. And Nettza was under the reign of King Nethash, the builder and founder of the kingdom. King Nethash, a distant descendant of Enox, whom the Rift Plain was named after, was esteemed as the ruler of Enoch because of his bloodline. After Nethash built and established his kingdom, it became the main point of the population of the entire Rift Plain, a center for different cultures, and a hub for sojourners. One night, when King Nethash was lying in his bed, he heard the wind rushing between the curtains of his window. As he walked to his balcony, he looked to the sky above, and he saw Arden among the stars. And he said to himself, "The earth hangs in the sky tonight, but why? Could it be a sign from Toniel? I shall make that world mine, and my kingdom will prosper." So King Nethash set forth to multiply the strength of his army, for word had gone out through Enoch concerning the great war. King Nethash began to build up his army, saying in his heart, "If I have the strongest militia, then I will be the strongest king in Imperia, and all will bow before me." So Nethash's heart was lifted up in vanity, and his pride would be his downfall. Now there came a day when King Ankajar of Ultira had sent his messengers to the Rift Plain Enochs, to make a proposition for the kingdom of Nettza. There they scouted out the land, and found only a large forest of tall trees. Mahar, one of the messengers, led the way through the forest, and they came across an elven town. And Mahar said to the elves, "We are officials from the palace of Ultira, sent by the king to give a message. What is the name of this place?" And they said, "You are in Genshur, the elven capital of Enochs." Then Mahar asked the elf that spoke with him, "Have you a king or queen?" And the elf replied, "We have no need for a leader, for we ourselves govern this city." Mahar and his fellow messengers were confused, because King Ankajar had told them about the kingdom of Nettza. Then Mahar questioned the elf again, "We were sent to give a message from our king to the king of Nettza. Where is his kingdom?" The elf said, "Far beyond the great river of Ephraim. You will see the city as you cross the river, you cannot miss it, for its tower reaches to the clouds." Mahar and the messengers traded their silver coins for an elven ship, which they boarded to cross the river. Mahar and his messengers reached the kingdom of Nettza, and they were stopped at the gates of the castle. And Mahar said to the guards, "We are of the royal palace of Ultira, sent by King Ankajar to deliver a message to your king." So the guards let them pass. They came to the throne room, where King Nethash sat looking proudly into the skylight. "Your Highness," said Mahar, "we are from the land of Ultira on Arden, and our king has made a proposition to you. He wishes for your cooperation in joining forces with our army. He says together our armies can prevail in the midst of the war, and that we may even be able to stop the beast." Bowing, Mahar held out a scroll, which was to be signed by the king. But King Nethash rose from his throne, walked down the stairs, and took the scroll to rip it in half, saying, "I will not sign your treaty under any circumstance. We are not allies, and we never will be. Tell your precious king that we will take down any kingdom that attempts to rise above me and my kingdom. I have spoken." His royal guard signaled, and Mahar and the messengers were forced out of the castle. King Ankajar's messengers returned to Ultira, and they revealed the torn scroll to him. And Ankajar was greatly afflicted, for he never thought a king could act in such a manner. He said, "What madness is this? Is this what a man gets for humbling himself before another? If he says he will trample any kingdom other than his, then I shall be the first to show him how weak he truly is. I hereby declare war on the kingdom of Nettza. This war shall never end until their king is dead." King Ankajar took out another scroll, and he began to write another document. Instead of writing a peace agreement, this time he wrote a declaration of war. King Ankajar sent his messengers to Nettza once again. As the messengers were walking about the streets of the city, they were ambushed by Nethash's archers, who were hiding behind the bells on the top of a bell tower. To avoid causing concern in the hearts of his citizens, King Nethash himself went down to the city to inspect the bodies of the messengers. Under the robes of one of the men was the scroll with the seal of Ultira, and blood was splattered across it. "Burn their bodies in the pit, and clean this scroll. I shall read it in the castle after I have bathed myself," ordered Nethash to his guards. The soldiers burned the bodies of the messengers, and they brought the scroll to King Nethash's throne. Nethash read the letter in the scroll, then said to his guards, "I demand General Kilamar's presence at once." General Kilamar, known as the strongest man in the kingdom of Nettza, was given full authority over the Nettza army, because Nethash knew Kilamar was more skilled in leading an army than himself. General Kilamar arrived in the king's throne room and knelt before him. Nethash said, "Raise your head, General. I have received word from the Ultaran army that they have declared war on us. This is your time to show off the strength of your men. Go, make war." General Kilimar raised his head, stood on his feet, and left the castle. Receiving word that his messengers were killed, King Ankajar sent spies to Enox. The spies snuck into the Nettza military outpost, where their soldiers were training, and they reported to Ankajar the number of their troops. The number they reported to Ankajar was about 29,000. Then King Ankajar said, "Let us make one more attempt to make them our allies, for their army is large." Therefore, the king began to draft a treaty. During this time of the Great War, there was a large airship built for the purpose of sailing through the currents of the space of Oresta. This ship was called the Solar Phantom, and it was used for traversing Oresta to reach different rift planes. King Ankajar bought the ship for a temporary time, to meet with King Nethash in it, because Ankajar knew he would be ambushed if he visited Nettza. Each of them brought their army on the ship, and the two armies faced each other while the king sat down. They held the meeting in the core deck of the ship, where there was a large dining table. Extending the treaty to Nethash, Ankajar said, "King Nethash of Nettza, please accept my offer. I will not start this war if you sign this treaty, but I will instead give you and your kingdom many riches. I would rather our nations not endure the calamities of war." And King Nethash responded, "I do not need your riches, for my kingdom rests above the greatest reservoir of precious stones and crystals on Enox. Keep your platinum and your gold and silver. Nevertheless, I accept your offer. May there be peace between our kingdoms, and I may even allow diplomatic relations." While King Nethash was signing the treaty, a group of assassins in his army climbed to the ceiling of the core deck, and they readied their crossbows and knives. Where the kings were sitting, each of them had their army behind their backs, and their aeons were positioned in the front lines. "I hope our countries get along well," Nethash said, as he finished signing the treaty. King Ankajar took the paper, and stamped his seal on the scroll, saying, "Thank you for your cooperation, King Nethash." Both of them stood to their feet, their armies still facing each other. As King Ankajar began walking toward his room in the ship, an arrow shot down, and one of the soldiers in his army fell. Immediately King Nethash was gone and had left through the rift gate to his castle. And King Ankajar shouted to his army, "Then this is war. Do not hold back, wipe out every last one of them." The Nettza and Ultaran armies began fighting within the Solar Phantom, and the assassins aimed their crossbows at King Ankajar as he fled through the rift gate. Their arrows missed, and Ankajar escaped to the palace safely. Each of the army's aeons began firing blasts of blaze arclight at each other, and the walls of the airship burned down. The soldiers ran through the holes in the walls as they dueled with each other. The two armies fought relentlessly, and they maimed each other mercilessly. The Solar Phantom's arclight core and crystals began to fail because of the aeon's arclight energy. Thus, the ship failed, and it fell along with both armies. After the fall of the Solar Phantom, Ultaira and Nettza declared war on each other. King Nethash began to strengthen his military in order to surpass that of Ultaira's. King Ankajar also strengthened his military forces, and he multiplied the number of his troops. Now the two armies were even in numbers. King Ankajar had about 21,000 warriors, and King Nethash had about 22,000. Each army split their ranks into two sections, the swordsmen and archers in the back, and the aeons in the front. King Ankajar hired 11 more generals to work alongside General Nair. So there were 12 generals who had authority over the 21,000 soldiers of the Ultaran army. The 12 generals were Nair, Joktan, Eros, Shirk, Torn, Ekon, Sephim, Wilhelm, Arniraz, Decker, Itar, and Opis. Each general was given authority over about 1,750 troops. While King Ankajar was preparing his armies, King Nethash was already on the move. The Nettza army had already arrived on Arden through the rift gate in the city of Thasha, and Nethash sent his troops to camp in the valleys of the mountains of Grianara. The next day, King Ankajar looked out his window to see the sunrise. In the distance there was approaching a large army, and the multitude of troops began to block out the sun, as they marched over the hills in the south. Seeing this, and knowing it was the Nettza army, Ankajar ordered his guards to sound the trumpets. The guards grabbed large trumpets, and they went to the tops of the palace towers to blow them. The whole city heard the sound of the trumpets, and the people began to panic. King Ankajar said to his guards, "Go into the city to comfort the people. Hide the women and children in their homes, and do not let them come out. Gather all the peasants of the streets to take shelter in the palace basement." So the guards took shields and went to the streets of the city to bring order to the chaos. Eventually, the streets were emptied, and King Ankajar gave the order for battle to the 12 generals. The 12 generals took their armies with them, and each of them went out through the gates of the city. General Nair and General Shirk's armies came out of the south gates, and General Oppis and General Wilhelm's armies came out the north gates. The rest of the generals, with their armies, stood behind the east and west gates, awaiting the command to march out to the Ulturan fields. The Nettza army could now be seen in its full size. The 4 generals with their armies marched outward from the city. The sound of the Nettza and Ulturan armies caused a rumbling in the fields, and the women and children in their homes were afraid because of the sound. The 2 armies approached each other on the field, and the generals' armies reached the foot of the hill, where the Nettza army was descending from. Now the Ulturan and Nettza armies stood face to face. Each army had their Aeons in the front lines. The generals shouted, "Attack," and their Aeons began firing arclight towards the army ahead of them. The Aeons held conduit staffs, which helped their aim and amplified their arclight powers. General Oppis' Aeons wielded blaze arclight, General Wilhelm's Aeons wielded plasma arclight, General Shirk's Aeons wielded MYST arclight, and General Nair's Aeons wielded all-far, which is a synthetic arclight made using alchemy. The generals of the Nettza army had Aeons who could use blaze, plasma, MYST, all-far, and quake. So the armies charged into each other, and arclight energy began to flash like lightning throughout the battlefield. Those with swords and shields charged toward the center of the battlefield, mauling each other viciously. The archers, and those with crossbows, all stood behind the swordsmen and Aeons, and would shoot their arrows toward the center of the field. Some Aeons would aid the archers, and they would allow them to use their arclight energy in order to strengthen their arrows. The battle raged on for 3 hours. After the 3 hours were past, the Nettza army brought out their catapults, which were charged with blaze arclight. Their Aeons pulled back the catapults, each holding a 50-ton boulder, then conducted their arclight energy into the rocks, so that they would catch on fire. King Ankajar watched the battle from the safety of the city wall, and he saw the catapults from afar, and the flaming boulders shooting into the air and falling on the groups of soldiers. So Ankajar called forth the 4 armies of the East Gate to the battlefield. The 4 armies that came from the East Gate were led by Joktan, Eros, Torn, and Ekan. Seeing that there were more troops coming out of the city, the Nettza army split themselves into 3 legions. One section of the army went to the east side of the kingdom, while the other section went off to the west side of the kingdom. The rest of the army stood in the center of the battlefield, and they continued to wipe out most of the Ulturan army. Eventually, General Nair and General Oppis both were defeated, and their armies fell with them. After they fell, General Wilhelm was also killed. With only General Shirk's army remaining, Ankajar sent the armies from the west gates to the battlefield. When General Joktan and Eros' armies reached the battlefield, they were confronted by one of the sections of the Nettza army. The 3 armies on the east fought valiantly. Now the Nettza army's catapults were destroyed, and Joktan and Eros' armies wiped out the right section of the army. So General Shirk and most of his army survived, and they were ordered to retreat to the city. After General Shirk's army retreated, the left section of the Nettza army began to invade the west gates of Ultyra. But there they came across the other 4 generals, Sephim, Aniraz, Dekka, and Itar, with their armies. Sephim and Aniraz's armies surrounded the left side of the Nettza army, while Dekka and Itar surrounded them on their right side. So that section of their army was circled in, and their Aeons began blasting blaze arclight at the surrounding soldiers in order to escape. Then the rest of the Nettza army came to their aid and began attacking the soldiers which surrounded them. General Itar's army fell, along with many of the soldiers from Dekka and Aniraz's armies. After an hour had passed, the Nettza army broke through the walls of the city, and they infiltrated the kingdom. Their Aeons ran in the streets, and they lit shops and homes on fire, killing many women and children. General Sephim and Aniraz's armies went into the city to fight against them, and they protected the citizens who were hiding. Then General Dekka fell along with his army. While battles were occurring on the edges of the city, King Ankajar returned to the palace. In the throne room, Ankajar called forth his special force. This was a secret miniature army which he had been forming during the time the Ulturan army first formed. The special force consisted of 20 extremely skilled Aeons, who were all descendants of Draxavan. Once Ankajar called them, they all came out from the hidden chamber, which was behind the wall of the throne. And King Ankajar said unto them, 7 of our generals have fallen with their armies. Now is the time for you to reveal your power to this kingdom. 10 of you go out to the fields, and wipe out every last one of the soldiers in their army. The rest of you go to the west side of the city wall, to aid the remaining troops of our army. Be quick and efficient, for I do not wish for this battle to go on any longer. So 10 of the Aeons went out into the city, and 10 went out to the Ultaran fields. The special force reached the west side of the city, and they aided General Sephim and Anira's armies. They left no trace of the Nettza army, whereas they had previously been rioting in the streets. The other 10 Aeons reached the Ultaran fields, and they ambushed the remaining soldiers of the Nettza army. And the people who were inside and on top of the city walls saw the great explosions which came from the Aeons' arclight in the field. Pillars of fire and smoke arose in the distance, and not a single Nettza soldier remained. And the watchers on the city walls said, By the heavens! What kind of Aeons could possess such power? The Ultaran army saw that the Nettza army was destroyed, and they began to rejoice over their victory. They were perplexed by what had just happened, yet they were joyful that the battle was won. Soon the word went out to all the citizens of the kingdom that the battle was over, and they were free to walk the streets again. Then King Ankajar decided to strengthen his militia once again, because he saw that his army was weakened from the battle. The next morning, after the battle, Ankajar was taking a walk in the palace garden, and he came to speak with me, one of his servants. I, Jesson, was a scribe who recorded Ultira's history from the time of my youth, and this was the reason I was hired. King Ankajar sat by me in the garden, saying, Jesson, my friend, I come to you with a request. I ask that you record the events of this war from here on out, so that my descendants will see that I was victorious in this war. This was when I began to write these things. For I was there since the beginning of Ankajar's rule, and I had been watching and recording everything that took place, to show how good of a king he was. As spring began, the rest of the month was quiet and peaceful. Ankajar had finished all his work from the night before, and he had time to rest in his bed the next day. While he was sleeping in his chamber, one of the soldiers knocked on his door. Queen Holly opened the door, and she took the scroll that was in the guard's hand. Returning to Ankajar in their bed, Holly gave Ankajar the scroll, which was sealed with an elven seal. The next morning, Ankajar read the scroll, and saw that it was from the land of Evenhara. And Ankajar said, By the heavens, that the elves would offer their hand in this war from so far away. Truly I am grateful to them. By no means shall we now be able to lose this war. King Ankajar stamped his seal on the scroll's case, and he sent it by airship to the city of Ahana. Now King Nethash was wroth, for he had not expected his army to fall at the hands of the Ultrans. Therefore, Nethash set forth to make an alliance with the Vienna, so that he could be in close contact with the kingdom of Ultira. So King Nethash used his castle's rift gate, and he arrived just north of the land of Emek on Arden. As Nethash and his guards journeyed through the land of Emek, they came to the village of Irii. Irii was the largest Vienna village in the land of Emek, and they had great potential for battle. When Nethash came to the village, he saw the Vienna there, that they were tall and agile. So Nethash came to the entrance of the village, which was at the top of the tall trees. When Nethash and his guards approached the gates, they were greeted by 2 tall Vienna officers, who were keeping Humes out of their village for the sake of peace. And Nethash said unto the Vienna, I am King Nethash of Nettza, the greatest kingdom on the rift plain Enox. I demand you bring your village chief out here, I have a proposition for this people. And the Vienna replied, We can smell the scent of your wicked and proud heart, and it reeks. The Holywood does not recognize you as an agent of peace, thus the Holywood will not hear you. Then Nethash said, The trees cannot speak. Let me speak with your chief. After he said this, the Vienna did not respond. Being filled with rage, Nethash turned from the gates of the village and went to his Aeons. And Nethash said to them, Burn this village to the ground. So 4 Aeons went out silently amongst the trees which supported the foundations of the village, and they set the trunks on fire with blaze. The Vienna sensed this, and the chief of the village sent out her best officers to fight the Aeons below the village in the forest. But they were too late, the entire village crashed down, and the trees turned to ash. Then Nethash left the land of Emek with his Aeons to return to the Rift Gate in the north. Now word reached the land of Evenhara that the Vienna were attacked by the Netzar army, and the Efvest army of the city of Ahana began to seek vengeance. For the leading general of the Efvest army, Jeverith, said, "Any enemy of Altyra is an enemy of ours. And let us not turn aside from the tragedy that has befallen our Vienna sisters, for that would be a disgrace." Receiving word of this, King Ankajar also was wroth. Ankajar gathered his army to plan an ambush. The king gathered all his servants and guardians in the throne room. He said unto them, "I am planning an attack on the kingdom of Netzza, and it will be on their own soil. For they have blasphemed the name of Altyra countless times now. Behold, I have given each of you a very high rank in my kingdom, and you will now exercise that power. I am sending each of you to a designated post at the edges of the city of Netzza. Do not fear, for I am going with you. And I will bring the entire Altaran army, that the armies of Netzza will not prevail. The elves of the Efvest army have also joined forces with us, and they will be the key to our victory. We embark to Enox this evening, therefore brace yourselves." Once the members of the palace had left the throne room, King Ankajar pulled aside his most trusted servant, whose name was Pera. And he said to her, "I have chosen you, my most trustworthy servant, to accomplish the most difficult task of this battle. Take 900 gold from the treasury and adorn yourself with the most beautiful apparel that can be found in the palace. Then, approach the gates of the castle of Netzza, and bribe the guards to allow you to have dinner with their king. You shall persuade him to give a toast with you, making him think that you are toasting to his honor as king. And I have given you a deadly poison. Fill his cup with the poison. The king of Netzza shall die tonight." King Ankajar gave Pera a bag of powder, which contained the deadliest poison in the lands of Altyra and Grianara. Then Pera went into the treasury by the king's permission, and she stashed 900 gold coins in her money pouch. She also went into the ballroom and found exotic clothing to wear. After dressing herself, she went through the rift gate of the palace to go to Enox. Now the army of Altyra was stationed, each legion on an edge of the city of Netzza. And among them were all the strongest Aeons of the kingdom of Altyra, the ones who were in the special force. While the armies were hiding in the wilderness outside the city walls, Pera entered the city through the front gates. Pera walked down the main street of the city, and attracting much attention with her extravagant apparel. And the men standing outside of the shops shouted, "What land are you from? And which rift plain? Have you come to live among us?" But Pera paid no attention to them. Pera reached the entrance of the castle, and 4 tall guards stood in the way. And Pera said, "I have many riches to share with the king in his chamber. I have also come to have a toast with your king personally." Then the guard said, "Our king needs no more riches, for he is already the richest king in all the worlds." Then Pera split 10 pieces of gold among them. The guards granted her access into the castle. Pera entered the throne room, where King Nethash was staring into the skylight. "Who is this?" Nethash said. Pera, kneeling before the throne, said, "My lord, the rumors are true. You are indeed very pleasing to lay eyes on. If you had a queen, any woman would envy her." Then Nethash looked down to see the woman who spoke with him. And Nethash said, "If I had a queen, she would be dressed in marvelous clothing such as yours. What is it you have come into my castle to tell me?" Pera held up the bag of powder given to her by Ankajar, and she shook her money pouch. And she said, "Here, see, I have many pieces of gold in this pouch, 890 pieces to be exact. And I have brought this seasoning to drink with you." Now Nethash was interested in what Pera had to say, so he arose from his throne and walked down the stairs. "Come with me, I will show you to my dining hall." Pera had expected him to ask where she was from, but he did not, so she was confident now that she could fulfill her task. Nethash sought to make Pera his queen, thus he chose to be gracious to her. Nethash and Pera sat across from each other in the castle's dining hall. "Tell me your name, mysterious woman," Nethash said. And Pera replied, "I am Pera, my lord." Then Pera took the bag of powder, poured some in each goblet, and mixed the poison with Nethash's cup. However, she had poured more into Nethash's goblet than her own, so that she would not die with him. Then Nethash said, "To me and my kingdom, and to the future of Netzza, the greatest kingdom in all of creation." And, touching Pera's goblet with his, they both drank. Then King Nethash's eyes rolled into their sockets, and his face fell upon the table. So King Nethash of Nettza died that night. After this, Pera made her way out of the dining hall. But the king's guards smelled the scent of their king's body, so they knew what Pera had done. As Pera walked down the halls of the castle, the servants of Nethash came and surrounded her with halberds and staffs. "Is there a problem, sirs?" Pera said. And they said, "You have assassinated our king. What brings you to this conclusion?" Pera replied. "Our Aeons could smell the scent of death coming from his private chamber," they replied. And Pera replied, "Truly, you are mistaken. I gave a toast to him and to the prosperity of his kingdom, then he dropped dead. I assure you that I do not know what caused him to faint." And her words swayed the hearts of the guards. Then they said, "Show us the body of our beloved king." So Pera brought the guards into the room she had come out of. And, as they entered to gather around Nethash's corpse, Pera closed and locked the doors behind them. Pera heard the guards weeping over their dead king, and she placed her hands on the engravings of the doors. Then she sent a surge of arc-light energy through the doors, and she set off an explosion in the chamber. Now Pera escaped the castle and returned to the outside of the city walls, where the Ultaran armies were waiting to strike. Now the armies of Ultira were ready to attack the city. King Ankajar stood amid the soldiers who faced the entrance of the city. Once Pera reached him, he said to her, "Well done, my servant. Now, retreat to the royal rift gate, and return home. For the work you have done deserves the greatest respect." So Pera left Enox to return to the palace, and she rested there and watched over the kingdom. The city of Nettza was now under high alert. And, with no king to command them, their army was left to themselves. Ankajar stationed his strongest Aeons in the front lines, and they all faced the walls of the city. Then, behold, through the royal rift gate behind the Ultaran army the Efest army came marching out. They had 4 legions of elves, each skilled in archery and swordplay. They also had many strong Aeons, trained in the ways of rare arclights. But the Nettza army was not prepared, so they trembled in hopeless fear. Nightfall came, and the armies of Ultira came flooding into the city. Jeverith, the commander of the Efest army, led 2 legions of the elves into the city, and they burned down the small houses at the edges of the city. Soldiers of the Nettza army ran towards the Ultaran and Efest armies with conduit staffs and claymores. One by one, Nettza soldiers were beheaded and cut in 2, till the Ultaran and Efest armies reached the base of the castle. The soldiers who hid in the castle were ready to fight back. Now the elves surrounded the western and northern sides of the castle. And they blasted through the walls with powerful charges of blaze. Then the walls came falling down, and the soldiers hiding within were exposed. The elves raided the inside of the castle walls, and the Nettza soldiers were wiped out. The elves only needed to use their elven swords, which were only 1.5 feet each in length. Elven swords have engravings on their blades which are infused with the strongest arclight element of whatever elf is using it. So, with every slash of the sword, the elves released their arclight energy. The western and northern sides of the castle were utterly destroyed. While the elves attacked their sides of the castle, the Ultaran army stormed the southern and eastern sides of the castle. Aeons, archers, swordsmen, and arbalists all charged into the front gates of the castle, wiping out every man they saw. Not a single soldier was given a chance to attack as the Ultaran armies invaded the remaining sections of the castle. Then, after they had finished taking out all the castle soldiers, the Ultaran and Efest Aeons circled around the foundation of the castle tower, which was in the center of the castle behind the throne room. The Aeons lifted their hands and looked up at the top of the tower. Then, all at once, they summoned Quake Arclight, which broke the entire tower into countless pieces of rubble. And the tower fell straight down, as if it had never even been built. Now the armies on the outside of the castle had finished destroying the buildings and wiping out the citizens. And Ankajar, who had fought alongside them, stepped to the outside of the city ruins. And he said, "Now this city of fools has been put down, and their haughty king has been put in his place. So let us celebrate over these ruins, then we shall rebuild over them." The armies of Ultira and Efest rested, and everyone left alive came to gather around King Ankajar. And the elves and Ultarans danced over the ruins of the city. The servants of Ankajar brought flags and drinks to serve the hundreds. The drinks were held in sealed barrels, and everyone grabbed glasses to drink from them. So the great kingdom of Nettza was brought to ruin that night. Now Ankhejar and the elves had left Enox, and Ankhejar left his aeons to clean the land of the ruins, so that he could build over it later. King Ankhejar now sat again on his throne, and his heart was lifted high because of the accomplishment of his kingdom. But he was not proud of himself, but of all the people who fought for him in the battle. King Ankhejar said to his servants and to all of his guards, "You have all been victorious in this battle. Though most of you kept your lives, there were still a few who were killed, and their valor must never be forgotten. For your bravery and valor, I give to you the right to rule over the new kingdom which I will establish on Enox. The new kingdom, which will be built over the ruins of Nettza, shall be called Nevri, because it rests on the ground where we had our greatest victory." And King Ankhejar gave to each of the leading soldiers of his army a medallion attached to a necklace, which would be a symbol of their stewardship alongside the king. He gave the medallions to 9 warriors who fought valiantly in the battle. The first 3 were swordsmen, and they were given the medallion of war. These were their names, Gesh, Hethta, and Torais. The next 3 were archers, and they were given the medallion of wisdom. Their names were Ejarth, Varius, and Diram. The last 3 were Aeons, and they were given the medallion of power. The 3 Aeons were Aelian, Laish, and Kistis. The medallion of war gives the authority to govern the military. The medallion of wisdom gives the authority to judge the people and make decisions. The medallion of power gives the authority to rule over the other medallions. So the city of Nevri was to be under the authority of these 9 warriors. Now 3 years had passed, and the city of Nevri was finished being built. The city was governed by the 9 warriors, Gesh, Hethta, Torais, Ejarth, Varius, Diram, Aelian, Laish, and Kistis. In the course of time, many of the soldiers who had also fought in the battles came to live in the city. And so the city of Nevri grew in population over time. After Nevri was finished being built, Ankhejar and Holly became one flesh, and Holly conceived a male child. The next month, Holly gave birth to their son, and she named him Calvus. He is to be the next king of Altyra, and he will pass these stories down his generations, so that the goodness of his father will never be forgotten. Let this book remind the people of Altyra of their great king, who was humble, and who delivered them from the evil kingdom of Nettza in wisdom and power. I am Jessen, and I have written these things based on what I've seen and heard. Now I end this account.